Hey everybody, so this video is different than my other stuff because my other videos are all sketches that I act out, but I thought it would be informative for some people out there to hear about the way I converted from Christianity. I see a lot of videos like this and I assume that they help people in some way, that they give people comfort or help people to think things through for themselves. So I thought maybe my story could help too. So I was born in an Italian-American neighborhood in New York. And I was raised Roman Catholic. My mother was fairly devout, a true believer, and my father was a non-believer, although he thought that church was important to shape morals. So while he didn't have to go to church, he wanted all of us to go to church. And if we ever pointed out that he was moral and he didn't have to go to church, so why can't we also be moral without having to go to church? He'd just sort of smack us in the head, and that would be the end of that argument. So as a child, every Sunday I had to go to Mass with my mother, my grandmother, my sisters, my brother, and we'd have to sit and stand and kneel for about 45 minutes while the priest would, drone on and on about God knows what, because no one was paying attention. But just to be clear, I don't have any real issues with spiritual people or Christians or people of any religious faith that aren't, crazy. Look, if your religious beliefs are causing you to be paranoid, conspiratorial, angry, or bigoted toward others who are just different from you but are just trying to peacefully coexist with you, if it's causing you to contract your horizons instead of expanding them, then it's not serving you well. And I find that this is largely the personality that a literal interpretation of the Bible creates. Most of the Christians that I know personally are reasonable, kind people. They're not young earth creationists. They don't take the Bible literally. And this, I think, is largely because the Catholic Church knows how insanely stupid the Old Testament actually is. Because it shows us a God who is basically an immoral, intolerant idiot who seems to forget that he's omniscient all the time. He makes a ton of mistakes. He tells people to commit genocide, tells them where they can buy slaves and how they can beat those slaves within an inch of their lives as long as they don't kill them, and how it's cool to pass them down as property to their children. So the Catholic Church likes to pretend that that part of the Bible doesn't really exist. And in fact, you don't really ever read from the actual Bible during a Catholic Mass. There's a Bible somewhere in the church, like, one Bible up on the altar, but no one really looks at that because essentially all you're doing is reading from that week's hymnal, which is a prepared booklet that they print out each week, and it has whatever songs you're going to drone through, and typically it might have like something from the Sermon on the Mount, or primarily it was Paul's letters, to like the Corinthians or whoever they were. And they just never talked about Adam and Eve or the book of Job or Noah's flood. That was just fairy tales to me when I was in Catholic school. Although I do remember when I was a very young child, I knew about Adam and Eve, and I did initially believe that it was a true story. But this was at the age when I also believed in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. But I remember Life magazine, right? We had a subscription to Life magazine, and one issue came and it was about evolution. And I remember showing it to my mom and saying, wait a minute, I thought Adam and Eve were the first people created by God. And my mother said without even hesitating, well, no, humans evolved. That's just how God did it. And that's basically where I left it. We evolved from apes, and that was cool with me. I was like, okay, it makes sense. And I never asked any more questions about it. I just always assumed that the stories in the Old Testament were the mythology, used to make a larger point about something. So for me, evolution was never a problem. It was never in conflict with my religious beliefs. Young earth creationists and other fundamentalist Christians like to believe that people who were Christian and have deconstructed somehow decided that it's because of evolution. And evolution has become their new religion, which is like the dumbest thing you could talk yourself into believing. For me, learning about the Old Testament was the reason I realized that this religion was insane and just not real. But before I get into that, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my childhood growing up Christian. When you're a Catholic, you reach a certain age and then you have to go for your first communion when you're around 8 or 9 or 10. I don't really remember all the details about my first communion, But I remember going to church and they would show you how you were going to get in line and wait for your wafer, and the priest was going to give you your wafer, and then you were going to eat it, and you were going to make the sign of the cross, and you were going to go either, right or left depending on which aisle you're in, and then you're going to go around the church, you go all the way to the back, and then come up the center and go back to your pew. Because apparently kids have to rehearse that. And I also have this memory of kids getting the host placed on their tongue for the first time and then turning around and just making a face like, oh my God, is that what Christ tastes like? And then once you're done with that, you have to start going to confession. And for those of you unfamiliar with the church and how all that works, basically they tell you, okay, look over there. You see that thing in the corner of the church in the back that's dimly lit and kind of looks like it could be a haunted wardrobe? Okay, inside of that box, there's a little old man. And you're going to go down there and you're going to get in the other door. There's going to be a little screen between you and the old man. And then you're going to tell him all the bad things you've ever done. And he's going to forgive you so you don't burn in hell for all eternity when you die. He's going to tell you to say a few prayers and then you're going to be forgiven, like magic. This way you can receive communion next Sunday, and if you die, you won't go to hell. Kind of like a get out of hell free card, which brings up all these other ideas, because now you're thinking, well, I could technically murder somebody, and as long as I go to confession before I die, it's all good, right? Because these are the sort of things you start thinking about when you learn about this loophole. But understand, I'm like a 10-year-old boy going through puberty, and basically I only have one sin to report. And I commit it constantly. And now I have to go to this box in the back of the church and tell some little old guy who I don't really know what I've been doing to myself. And this was like a real source of stress for a young boy. So I'm literally walking down the aisle, going to the confessional and saying, burn in hell or confess that I masturbate. Burn in hell or confess that I masturbate. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I chose hell. And now hear me out. Because I figured as long as I confess to a priest that I masturbate before I die, like at some point in my life, I'd be okay. So I played the odds because I'm young and I'm healthy. And, at that age, I had no hopes of ever actually stopping masturbating. So, every week it was just going to be like, hey, Father, the usual. I did it again. I'm sorry. And eventually I figured he was just going to be like, you know what? I don't forgive you. You're a pervert and God doesn't forgive you. So I figured, let me hold on to this for a few years, I literally had images of myself as an old man, like in my deathbed, with a priest coming to visit me before I die. And I roll over and I grab him by the arm and I say, Father, I jerked off a lot, And in my mind, the priest would have been like this nice, pragmatic, kind of modern priest. And he'd be like, you know what, I think you're fine. If that's your biggest sin, I don't think you have anything to worry about. When was the last time you masturbated? And I would have probably said like, well, what time is it now? So this was my life as a young man, committing sins Monday through Thursday, going to confession on Friday, laying low for the most part over the weekend, which became a problem as I got older, because that's when you want to have the most fun and commit the most sins. You see, because you couldn't take the host if you're impure, right? Because that's a sin too. So then if you start going to confession, you figure, well, maybe I'll go on Saturday night. But you can't go too late because there's no priest in the box after a certain hour. So, you just kind of felt your way through it and you did your best and you just assumed, okay, God's going to understand. He's a good guy. And as long as I confess at some point before I die and I take communion, I'm good to go. Catholicism was cool that way. It was a pretty flexible faith, lots of elbow room for the sinner. So there was no real reason to drop it just because you wanted to sin once in a while, and twice on Saturday. In my prime, 3 times. So the argument you quit the religion so you could sin rationalization that I hear from fundamentalists all the time, that's bullshit too. Because if you sincerely believe that you would burn in hell for an eternity if you sinned, the last thing you would want to do is quit the religion, especially when it's so easy to just be forgiven and avoid hell, No, people quit the religion for one simple reason. Because they all come to the inevitable conclusion that it's stupid and not real, not even close to being real. So let's just think about what Christian theology teaches us is true, okay? There exists this eternal, perfect, all-loving, all-knowing, omnipotent God who suddenly decides, after an eternity of being perfectly content, that he wants to create paradise. Apparently he has this sudden, uncontrollable urge to be worshipped. He's got a very fragile ego, I guess. So in this paradise, he creates the world, complete with all of the plants and all of the animals, but only thinks to make 2 humans. And in fact, initially he only makes 1 human, a man named Adam, and he only decides to make a female after Adam couldn't find a suitable helper among the animals. I'll let you just percolate on that for a second. Check out Genesis 2:18 if you're doubting what I'm saying. When this omnipotent God is done creating, he needs to take a break because apparently he's only omnipotent for 6 days at a time. Okay, let's assume none of the creation stories are meant to be taken literally. We still have a loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God who created an imperfect world full of sinful humans, disease, and natural disasters. This could mean he did it deliberately, so he's not all-loving, or he is all-loving but not all-powerful. But then that leads to the question, if he's not all-powerful, how did he create everything in the first place? So maybe he's all-powerful and all-loving, but just not very bright. But if he's not very bright, how did he learn the quantum physics necessary to create everything in the first place? So maybe he is very bright, he's all-loving, he's very powerful, but just not all-powerful. And so he couldn't really do anything to stop Satan from messing things up for us. He wants to, but he can't. Because the only way to explain an all-loving creator creating an imperfect world is by taking away his perfection. Of course, there's another way to explain a world in which sometimes good things happen and sometimes bad things happen indiscriminately to both good and bad people. And that's simply by taking God and Satan out of the equation entirely. You know, I mean, if it's the same imperfect world with or without them, what do you need them for? So I hope this is helpful. If you like it and you want me to do more, comment below or give it a like. Subscribe if you haven't. I have lots of funny stuff to share if you're into that type of thing. And I'll see you around.